The knight holds the dead woman by the hair and declares that the witch Owen is dead, and now it is all over for Clan Letha. The girl looks at her dead mother in horror and begins to scream in despair. As soon as the girl moved, dozens of swords were immediately pointed at her. The knights discuss that Owen's daughter is in front of them and decide what to do with her next. One of the guards says that the girl needs to be sent to the crown prince as a trophy. The girl looks at the knights with anger and thinks that her mother is now dead and her clan has been destroyed. Nomads of the Leith clan, a small people who emerged from the Eliza plateau. From the very beginning, they had dark hair and skin. They were said to be on the other side of the world. Stupid people who sought to show their superiority by ostracizing themselves and others were branded. During the invasion of the Blanche Kingdom, many members of the clan were killed, so they had to leave their lands. 300 years have passed since then, and a lot has changed. The surviving clan changed its name from Eliza to Letha. The skin and hair, which were completely black, changed color over time. Nomads wandered throughout the country, staging performances and thereby earning a living. The memory of their persecution gradually faded, and Leith might have become a culture if only the civil war in Blanche had not required a new enemy of the people. First, Prince Waldo Blanche looks at the girl with interest and asks her name. The young woman lies on the floor, trembling all over, and answers that her name is Martina. The prince grabs the girl by the chin and scornfully says that she has a suitable name for a mudblood. Waldo smiles nastily and says that Martina will be good entertainment for the coming night. The heir made a plan for a win-win situation by eliminating all half-brothers competing for the position of successor. Waldo intended to destroy both sides, attracting Letha, who had only annoyed him for a long time. The man throws Martina on the bed and says that there is no point in giving up your name. People are afraid and reject what is different from themselves. The prince leans his whole body on the girl, who with tears in her eyes understands that she can do nothing. The king announces that the first prince has successfully suppressed the escape of the second heir, who rebelled and was in cahoots with a clan of witches. In gratitude for this, the ruler transfers the throne to the original successor. The second prince, Theodore Blanche, who is in prison, sadly realizes that his death is not far off. Waldo gave the order to capture his brother, declaring that the nomads of Lethe had admitted to conspiring with him. Theodore tried to justify himself and shouted that he had been unfairly slandered. Sitting in prison, the prince reflects that he never wanted to become king, and although Vildo is a half-brother, he considered him his own. Suddenly, a man appears from the other side of the bars, completely hidden by a cloak. Martina takes off her hood and says that even though Blanche's hated blood flows in the young man, she will save his life. The girl offers to help the prince, but in return he must lend her his strength. Theodore sadly notes that now he is completely oppressed. He has neither power nor freedom left. Martina looks at the prince and in a quiet but decisive tone declares that she will kill the king. The girl screams that Theodore must avenge his shame by using her as an instrument of revenge. It was this meeting that was the beginning of a relationship that would stretch through 100 years. A few days later, Wildo organized a large festive banquet in honor of his accession to the throne. Martina was thrown in the center of the hall, to the amusement of everyone present. Suddenly, Vildo throws a sword at the girl and orders her to perform the famous sword dance that her clan is so proud of. Martine realizes with hatred that in front of her is the sword of the murdered Owen. Blanche wants to put on a performance from the symbol of the destroyed clan. The king thinks with a grin that even a wild beast that cannot be tamed before death tucks its tail between its legs, becoming submissive. Martina grabs the sword and begins her frantic dance, which attracts the attention of everyone gathered. Suddenly, with one powerful blow, the girl kills the king's guards. Vildo jumps up from the throne in fear. The king, enraged, orders the rest of the knights to kill the insignificant witch. Suddenly, the crowd parted, and Prince Theodore walked towards the throne, surrounded by guards. The brother looks at the king smugly and asks if he likes the celebration. The knight asks Theodore if it is worth sending the soldiers. The prince looks thoughtfully in the direction of Martina. With amazing dexterity, strength, and grace, the girl deals with all the soldiers attacking her. Martina said that dancing with a sword is not just an entertainment performance. This blade is forged in order to kill people. Theodore was sure that no matter how well the girl wielded the sword, most likely she would not be able to leave there alive. The second prince orders the doors to be closed and to ensure that no one can leave the hall. Even though Waldo must die, it is impossible to bring shame on the royal family, so he wants to present everything as the last atrocity of the witch. 2 hours later, the knights are surprised to notice that not a single sound is heard outside the doors. Despite the guards' concerns, Theodore orders the doors to be opened. Suddenly, the door swings open with a strong kick, and Martina appears on the threshold. The prince and the guards look in amazement at the girl with blood dripping from her. No one understands how Martina managed to deal with everyone and survive, because there were about 200 people in the hall. A girl with a sword in her hands approaches the trembling Waldo, who begs to spare him. With a grin, Martina says that after everything that happened, it is shameless for the king to beg for mercy. The brother turns to Theodore in despair and begs him to save him from the maddened witch. Hearing Waldo's words, the girl abruptly turns away and heads towards the second prince. Martina bows before Theodore and asks permission from her king to cut off the prince's head. After only 1 moment, Theodore, without any regrets, allows Martine to fulfill her desire. This is how Waldo's reign ended, and Theodore became the new king of the Blanche Empire. The new king won the hearts of the people by showing him asking God for forgiveness for his brother's sins. On the day of the coronation, Theodore gave the girl the title of Marquise, and from that day she began to be called Marquise Martina Owen de Letha. Martina, the last remaining heir of the Letha clan, became known as the guardian of the royal family. Martina began to be called the Scarlet Sword, and her fame spread throughout the continent. The girl's reputation cast a shadow on the king, and since then Blanche's empire began to be called the Scarlet Country. 8 years later, Letha was again accused of treason due to the king's selfish motives. Martina could not believe that Theodore Blanche could betray her and the clan. The girl's servant reports that despite the king's bad influence, many people support the girl. The young man assures that Martina must take advantage of this opportunity and break Blanche's state. So the girl turned the edge of her sword against the palace, supported by a large army. Martina enters the throne room and angrily tells the king that he took away the hope that he himself gave her. The marquise asks why the king betrayed her so mercilessly. Theodore looks sadly at the girl and declares that he has nothing to say to her. Martina cries in pain, and the king asks her forgiveness for using her to the very end. Theodore calmly stands up and says that the girl can do what she must. King Theodore met the same end as his brother, and Martina was crowned king. Much later, many researchers were sure that the king loved Martina, but all this remained only a theory. Attempts to destroy and exploit the Letha clan ended in the complete destruction of the royal bloodline. Subsequently, Martina crushed the entire continent and thus formed the Carabella Empire. Once the continent was reunited, the empress moved south, leaving the throne to her loyal servant Alito. Until her death, Martina had no children, so the bloodline of the Letha clan disappeared. The teacher ends by saying that since then, no emperor has the right to bear the surname Carabella. The woman slams the book shut and says that only Empress Martina was allowed to bear this name. The teacher looks at the class. The boys and girls are deeply impressed by the story they heard. The young girl looks absent-mindedly out the window. It seems that her thoughts are now much further than Empress Martina. The teacher adjusts his glasses on his nose and calls out to the student with obvious displeasure. Only the third time she hears her name, the girl turns and looks at the teacher in surprise. The professor sarcastically remarks that obviously history class is too easy for Astina. The woman is sure that the girl was looking out the window because she already knows the contents of the lesson. The Palais Academy is home to the brightest talents that form the intellectual foundation of the Carabella Empire. Every year, students take difficult exams. If a student fails twice, he is immediately expelled. The professor does not understand how Astina can successfully pass these tests and get high enough scores. The teacher decides that this time she will not put the brakes on the girl's frivolity. The woman says that Martina helped Theodore eliminate all his political rivals and asks how many noble houses were destroyed during this time. The students look at each other in fear. Such information is not even in the textbook. Everyone looks at Astina, who pays no attention to anyone and thoughtfully curls her fingers. The The girl says that if you don't count all the nobles who lost their possessions, then a total of 12 houses were destroyed. Realizing that Astina managed to get out, the professor asks the next question. Princess Selin, Theodore's aunt, married the Duke of a Talent. Why then did she support Theodore, who was not the crown prince? Astina confidently says that the concubine Ansel, Theodore's mother, was the eldest daughter of Count Sherritt, and at one time served as Selin's maid, with whom they were close. The teacher menacingly says that she did not know how well the student understands the history of the empire. Looking at the girl, the professor says that she would like to hear her opinion on current research in this area. Astina says there are many scholars who have their own interpretations of Martina and Theodore's last conversation. Many believe that the future empress planned everything from the very beginning to deliberately cloud the king's mind and take the throne. The teacher is not far behind and asks what Miss Astina's personal opinion is on this matter. The professor happily thinks that the girl will not dare to challenge the authoritative historian and awaits the answer with interest. The girl looks at the table and thinks that she has once again complicated her life and should be more careful in the future. Astina stands up and says that for Martina, Theodore's betrayal was the most severe blow in her life. The girl blushes and says that in her opinion, Martina loved the king from the very beginning. The professor takes off his glasses and asks threateningly if the student wants to make fun of her with her answer. But then the bell rings, and literally a second later, there is not a single student left in the class. Canna smiles and says that Sis did it again and went against the teacher. The girls walk down the corridor, and Astina says that she was just looking out the window during class. Canna looks at her sister and realizes that she is one of a kind. The younger sister is a genius. She learned to speak much earlier and faster than others. While ordinary children were learning to walk, Astina was reading piles of books on the history of the empire. Parents began teaching Astina manners and etiquette at the same time as their eldest daughter. To everyone's amazement, the youngest of the sisters mastered these lessons in 3 days. Looking at her sister's progress, Canna locked herself in her room and declared that she would no longer study with her sister. Later in the evening, the mother explains to the girl that she is very smart and smart for her age, and her parents are proud of her. The mother hugs Canna and says that her daughters are the best. But Astina is an exception to the rule, and you just need to accept it. At night, Canna wakes up from her younger sister sneaking into her room. With a stern expression, Astina declares that her sister does not need to be critical of herself, otherwise it will haunt and chain her until her death. Several years later, Canna witnesses her younger sister telling off the new escort knight, Sir Hisang. The man, in despair, admits that he was mistaken and asks the girl for forgiveness. Astina coldly remarks that if the knight remains like this, he will not be able to protect her father, and he will be killed. Noticing her older sister in the bushes, the girl leans over to her and asks her to keep everything she hears secret. Astina says that the father will be disappointed with the incompetence of his subordinate. Canna is sure that her father will be more disappointed that her sister is engaged in fencing, but Astina confidently says that being weak is much more dangerous. The younger sister promises that she will give Canna her dessert for a whole month if she agrees to keep everything a secret. The elder sister reflects that from early childhood, Astina spoke like a 60-year-old man in the body of a 5-year-old child. The girl tells her sister that, be that as it may, she should not contradict the professor if she wants to complete her studies until the end of graduation. Suddenly, Astina thoughtfully pronounces the name of the founder of their empire, Martina Owen de Letha Carabella. The girl thoughtfully says that the family prefix day was used by the Marquises in the Kingdom of Blanche, and Martina later became queen. Canna ponders that the Empress really has not erased from her name the past title given to her by the traitor. The girl simply remembered the name of the Empress, written down in textbooks, but never even thought about its origin. Suddenly, the sister says that Astina did not want to give up the name given to her by Theodore. Canna looks at her sister in surprise, and she, realizing that she had mixed up the name, hastily admits that she misspoke. The girls walk down the corridor, and Canna notices that her sister understands Martina's feelings very well. Astina admits that she knows the former empress almost more than herself. Suddenly, their friend Rachel runs up to the girls, holding some papers in her hands and choking on tears. The student says that she accidentally read a letter addressed to Canna. Astina snatches the papers from her hands and begins to read with concentration. Rachel mutters that she is ashamed of the misunderstanding, but the contents of the letter are simply terrible. Canna asks in bewilderment what is in the letter, but her sister continues to read intently. Unable to withstand the tension, the older sister loudly demands that the girls immediately tell her what happened. Astina looks at her sister with a gloomy expression and remains silent. Rachel begins to tell. The letter says that Canna should marry the Duke of Atalent. The girl realizes with horror that we are talking about the notorious monster Duke Theriot. The mother reports that in breaking news, the girl's father's business has gone through a huge crisis. The man invested all his money in exports, but the ship carrying the goods was caught in a storm and sank. Due to huge debts, the mansion in which they live is about to be taken away. But the Duchy of Atalanta, with whom the family did business, promised to cover all their debts. The deal will take place on the condition that Canna marries the Duke of Atalent. At the end, the mother writes that they had no choice, and the fate of the whole family now depends on the girl. The wedding is scheduled in a week, so Canna should return home as soon as possible to discuss all the details. Canna announces that she needs to go home, turns around and quickly leaves the room. The Duchy of Atalanta, a family of worthy vassals, dating back to the founding of the Kingdom of Blanche. The family maintained their position as loyal vassals even after the founding of the Carabella Empire. By all rights, such a trivial family as Rite could never contact one of the most ancient and noble families of the empire, but the dukes have one serious problem. The current head of the family was a monster with a body covered in fur, and no one knew exactly why and when Theriot van Atalanta became like this. Canna slams the closet door hard and realizes that she has no way out. A girl must marry and have a child from someone who tears people apart. Canna got the impression that she was simply told to go and die. Hearing Astina's steps, her sister says that the girl should know why she sometimes teased her. Canna says that even though her sister is a little weird, she still loves her very much. Suddenly, the girl throws herself on her sister's neck and begins to sob bitterly. Astina says that under no circumstances should she leave. Canna emphatically states that they are descendants of Count Rite, and now it is her time to fulfill her duty, and this is how a noble lady's marriage should be. Astina is furious and says that not all noble ladies marry in preparation for death. Canna breaks down and screams that she has no choice because she can't run away and live her life alone. The girl cries and says that if she does not agree to this marriage, the whole family will collapse. Astina gently says that they cannot afford to sell their sister's life because of their father's mistakes. Canna thinks that even a genius cannot understand the foundations of this world, and asks if her sister knows what happens to the fallen aristocrats. The sister calmly says that men become convict laborers, and women either become someone's mistress or a prostitute. Astina stubbornly asks whether the suffering of other people is more important than the life of Canna herself. Canna responds emphatically that no one can live without honor, so the matter is not discussed. Astina extends her hand to her sister and says that it is already late and the girls should return to this conversation tomorrow. In the evening, the students discuss the latest news and notice that Canna even skipped dinner and will sleep with Miss Astina today. The sisters lie in bed and remember that they haven't slept in the same bed for 10 years. As a child, when Canna had nightmares, Astina would come and calm her sister down. Obviously, this would be the last time. The girl looks at her quietly crying sister and thinks that she cannot let her leave. Astina looks gloomily with unseeing eyes and decides that she must do everything possible but not allow this marriage. Suddenly, the younger sister thanks the older sister for keeping the secret and not telling anyone about Sir Hyson. Astina says that she was caught when she wanted to steal the sword from the knight. The girl remembers how the Sir gave her a wooden sword and promised to give her his, a family heirloom, if she managed to hit him at least once. With a laugh, Canna learns that her sister beat the knight. He lost his family heirloom and became a drunkard. Astina admits that she returned the sword before entering the academy. Canna says that she was simply happy to learn that her sister would study with her at the same department of politics. Astina covers her sister with a blanket and says that she needs to sleep because she will have to get up early tomorrow. A little later, the girl listens to her sister's breathing and makes sure that she is fast asleep. Astina gets up, collects her things quietly, trying not to make noise, and leaves the room. The girl understands that she is walking through the corridors of the academy for the last time. Most likely, she will never be able to graduate. Images of kings appear in Astina's head, and she realizes with despair that this time she will not have a normal life. When the girl was 3 years old, she became fully aware of herself and was surprised to realize that she had been reborn. The girl cannot understand why she remembers her past life, because more than 100 years have passed since her death in Martina's body. The realization of all this was disappointing and depressing, because everyone Martina knew was already dead. The image of Theodore appears before the girl's eyes, and she thinks with hope that maybe he too has been reborn. At some point, Astina decides that she is no longer Martina at all and needs to accept this fact. Having decided to accept herself in a new image, the girl wanted to live her life honestly and serve her family faithfully. Astina enters the stable and reflects that the event that happened has made adjustments to her fate. Heading to the gates of the academy, the girl realizes that Canna, who led a measured life, will not be able to survive as the wife of a duke. Suddenly, Astina sees a silhouette at the gate, but he is too small for security. Canna blocks her sister's driveway and angrily demands that she stop. The sister asks in surprise where Astina was going without warning her. The girl quite calmly replies that she is heading to the Duchy of Atalanta. Canna shouts in anger that her sister is too confident. This time her opponent is not a man, but a monster. Astina sadly bows her head and says that in this case, she can kill him without regret. Suddenly, Canna grabs the reins and demands that her sister take her with her. Astina declares that this is completely impossible, but her sister stubbornly insists that she must definitely go. The girl looks at her sister, and after being silent for a moment, coldly declares that she doesn't think so at all. Realizing that she has no other choice, Astina pushes her sister sharply and forcefully, forcing her to let go of the reins. Ignoring her sister's screams, the girl spurs her horse and quickly leaves the academy. In the Atalant mansion, the men gathered at the table discuss that it has been almost a year since the young duke turned into a beast. One of the men says that the 5 people who entered the young man's bedroom died, so they no longer have any hope of an heir. Standing aside, Oliver, the young master's devoted butler, sadly remembers how it all began a year ago. Theriot called the butler and told him that he did not remember the previous night. The young man says that due to frequent attacks, he hardly sleeps at night, but there are no memories. Oliver, realizing what the Duke is talking about, screams in fear that this simply cannot be. The Grand Dukes of Atalanta have changed 15 times in the last 100 years. Among these dukes, 10 died before reaching adulthood, while the remaining 5 completed their terms of office, following their titles. The hereditary disease was that men lost their minds and intellect and turned into monsters. Symptoms begin with cracking skin, hair growing all over the body, and nails turning into claws. Then the situation worsens, and the person finally loses his mind, turning into a monster. The man notices that they have lost their vigilance, because the gentleman's symptoms began to appear much later than usual. Another man states that if he had known what would happen, he would have worried about the heir in advance. Baron Vernon states that every opportunity must be used, because even animals have the ability to mate. The men begin to scream in horror that the Baron is treating the Duke like a wild animal, and besides, no one would agree to marry a monster. Vernon calmly points out that the case needs to use a family with problems. The Baron declares that he is ready to listen to other proposals, but silence reigns in the hall. The vassal notes that if everything is left as is, Atalanta's house will soon collapse. A month later, Oliver looks out the window and thinks that tomorrow the lady from Reedy's house should come to the palace. The man understands that the whole idea is shameless and vulgar, and he did not want to agree with Baron Vernon. But still, he hopes for a miracle. Oliver wonders why they decided to send Rita's youngest daughter, who is famous for her intelligence and beauty, instead of her eldest. Suddenly, there is a knock on the door and the maids call for the butler. At the entrance, Oliver sees a woman who is almost completely hidden by a cloak. To the surprise of the servants, the girl takes off her hood and asks for forgiveness for arriving earlier than expected. The girl introduces herself as Astina Rita, and she has come to marry the Grand Duke. Oliver is surprised that the girl arrived a day earlier, and even without an escort, but Astina replies that she had her own reasons. The girl says that she should greet everyone properly, but she is so tired that she asks to postpone all the ceremonies until tomorrow. The butler accompanies Astina to her chambers and thinks that the girl is behaving rather strangely, as if she is in a hurry to die. Suddenly, Oliver remembers his duties, bows, and says that he is glad to welcome the lady to the Atalanta estate. Astina turns around and says that she is proud to have found the home of the first knight of the empire. Oliver thinks in shock that he did not expect to hear such a thing from the lips of a young lady. Lying in the hot water, the girl thinks that she feels incredibly tired from the intense rush. Astina reflects that if she had stayed even a little longer, Canna would certainly have followed her. Having rushed home, the girl asked right from the door why her parents were sending her sister away. Astina shouts that her sister doesn't have a chance against the monster, and she will die in vain in his house. The mother falls to her knees and shouts back that if she had had the slightest choice, she would never have given her daughter up to die. The girl angrily declares that she will go instead of Canna, and this is solely her choice, not her parents'. Astina thinks that if her family were poor, then they would have nothing to lose. The girl slowly dresses with the help of the maids and thinks that first she needs to assess the Duke's condition. Astina is not against giving birth to an heir, but if this does not work out, then she will have no choice but to kill him. Early in the morning, Oliver knocks on the doors of the chambers, but the answer is silence. The butler fears that the girl might have run away, but suddenly steps are heard behind him, and a female voice asks what happened. The butler turns around and is surprised to notice that Astina managed to return from training at such an early time. Oliver hands the girl an envelope and tells her that it contains a marriage contract. The girl thinks in amazement that she has never heard of such a quick marriage. However, it will be even better for her. Astina enters the chambers, sits down, and begins to carefully read the papers. The lady sadly notes that the name of her first husband, Theodore van Atalant, is surprisingly similar to the name Theodore. Oliver says that the girl needs to read everything carefully and ask questions if she doesn't understand something. Astina hands the surprised butler the papers and says that she has already signed everything. The butler looks at Astina calmly drinking tea and notices that it doesn't look like she was sold to a monster. A little later, a woman who introduces herself as Rebecca Pallet comes to the girl and says that she will help Astina in the matter of her unity with the Duke. The lady thinks that it is very funny to marry a man whom she has never seen, and today she will have to spend her first wedding night. Rebecca sheepishly says that she wants to approach this topic carefully, as she is afraid of hurting the girl's fragile feelings. The woman reports that the main difficulty is that Duke Theodore is now in the form of a wolf. Rebecca says quite seriously that the first wedding night of the young people will take place in a similar guise. Astina distantly thinks that at least the wolf is a beautiful creature. It would be very awkward if the Duke turned out to be a giraffe. Rebecca reports that animal mating is very different from human mating. Astina, not at all embarrassed, asks what exactly the difference is, which greatly confuses the woman. The girl looks out the window. She thought that she had already gone through all the circles of hell, but today she realized that she still had to endure a lot. Astina resolutely goes to the Duke's chambers and thinks that if something goes wrong, she will simply kill him first. For the first time in a long time, the girl feels that she is treated as a means to an end and not as a person. An image of Theodore immediately appears in Astina's head, announcing that he has one last request. Martina is horrified and says that she cannot do what the king asks her to do. The man declares that the girl must do this for the sake of both of them. The girl, with tears in her eyes, asks why Theodore is treating her so cruelly. Astina resolutely pushes away the memories and firmly decides that this is all in the past. Previously, Baron Vernon said that if the girl dies, then all their plans will collapse, so they need to use all means to save the Atalant family. The man takes out a bottle and says that this is a medicine that is used for Animal Crossing. The men begin to pray in horror, but the Baron assures that this will help increase their chances of success. Oliver, who witnessed that conversation, admits to the girl that he is terribly ashamed. Because of his greed, he committed many sins. Astina decisively takes a step towards the Duke's chambers and says that she will finally be able to see her husband. The girl turns to the butler and asks him to smile, because today is a happy wedding day. Astina thinks that she must do everything possible for the money that was promised to her family, and at the same time try not to kill the Duke. An hour later, the old maid tells Oliver that they should let the young maids go, who might be scared by the sight of blood. The servant reports that he has prepared tranquilizers that can put even a wild bear to sleep. The butler listens with fear to the silence outside the door and decides that if nothing happens in an hour, they will have to go inside. Suddenly, the door creaks and Lady Astina appears from the darkness of the room. Shocking the servants, the girl drags the wolf by the paw and reports that they have a small problem. Astina points to the emotionless wolf and says that he has no desire to mate at all. Entering the Duke's room, the girl lights a lantern and examines with displeasure the chaos reigning around. Before the curse, Theria was considered the most popular bachelor with a very attractive appearance. Walking into the chambers, Astina happily notices a sword hanging on the wall. Taking off the sword, the girl unlocks the lock and enters the cage with the beast. In front of her, on a tattered bedding, lies a huge white wolf with a menacing appearance that truly resembles a monster. The wolf lets out a loud roar, jumps from its place, and rushes straight at the girl. Astina deftly jumps away, dodging the attack, and raises her sword to strike. Stunned by the rebuff, the wolf looks at the girl in surprise, not knowing what else to expect from her. The beast rises to its full height. The fur on it stands on end, and the beast emits a loud roar. The wolf attacks Astina again and again, but each time the girl easily dodges the attacks. The lady understands that the wolf is strong, but he is a beast, and his attack methods are quite simple, so she easily predicts his movements. Having waited for the next jump of the beast, Astina jumps up and strikes him in the stomach with all her strength. The girl looks at the unconscious beast and thinks that as a rival, he is nothing of himself. Astina decides that she needs to complete what she came here for and raises the wolf's hind paw. Suddenly, the beast woke up and looked in amazement at the girl sitting between his legs. Suddenly, the wolf's eyes widen and he begins to whine pitifully, looking intently at the girl. Walking out of the room, Astina waves her hand and states that the Duke is heavy enough. The lady states that the Duke's condition is much worse than she expected to see. Astina looks at the beast and realizes that he is too weak, and she cannot kill him out of self-defense. According to the marriage contract, the girl must give birth to the Duke's child, but she has no idea what to do if the wolf has no interest in it. After thinking a little, the Duchess orders the butler to bring a strong chain. The girl also says that the room is too dark and dusty. You need to order the servants to clean everything there. Having put a collar and chain on the wolf, Astina takes him out into the garden. To the surprise of everyone, the animal calmly and obediently follows the girl. Approaching the tree, the wolf happily stands on its hind legs and begins to eat apples. As Astina thought, fresh air and activity are necessary, and it doesn't matter whether for a person or an animal. The Duchess suggests that the beast's self-esteem could have suffered significantly from being cooped up and alone for so long. The maids look out the window and cannot believe their eyes. Not only did the girl survive, she also tamed the monster. One of the maids dreamily says that this whole scene reminds her of a fairy tale about Beauty and the Beast. Another girl sarcastically says that the whole scene looks more like a housewife and her pet. At the other window, the maid looks angrily at the Duchess and wonders why she survived. The girl puts her hand to her stomach and thinks that if everything does not go according to plan, then she will be finished. Canna hasn't gotten out of bed for a week now. Her worried friends are trying to console the girl and feed her. Canna painfully thinks that her sister decided to die for her, and she herself turned out to be a coward and was afraid to live on her own. Arriving home, the girl learned from her parents that Astina had already left for the duchy. Canna sobbed uncontrollably. Her mother blamed her father for everything, and all he could do was pray. The girl covers her mouth with her hand, thinking that her little sister is most likely already dead. Suddenly, one of the students hands Canna an envelope and says that a letter has arrived from the duchy. The girl grabs the letter and starts reading, and her friend advises her to take the day off and go home. After reading the letter, Canna throws it aside, jumps out of bed, and starts running. The sister informs everyone that she is fine and asks Canna not to worry that she is not the one who got married. The girl runs down the corridor, remembering her sister's words that she will do everything possible to return home in about a year. Canna was so deep in her thoughts that she didn't notice the student coming towards her and ran straight into him. The young man says that his name is Benjamin Leandros, and he often sparred with Astina. The student anxiously asks if it is true that the girl married Duke Theriot. Benjamin shakes his hand and says with a smile that Astina has a special tactic that makes the loser feel humiliated. The girl wipes her sweat with her hand and advises the young man to study more and not waste time on empty talk. The guy notices that his friend is a talented fencer, but then why does she have such a terrible weapon? Astina directly states to her instantly embarrassed friend that, unfortunately, she has no money. The lady admits that her family is against fencing, so she could only buy this poor sword with the pocket money she saved. Benjamin walks down the corridor, carrying a brand new sword in his hands, a gift for Astina, when he suddenly stumbles upon gossiping students. The guy freezes and hears that the girl's family actually sold her to the Duke, with whom a marriage contract had already been signed. The student is horrified to learn that her friend's husband is the very famous Duke Theriot. Canna clenches her fists and tells Benjamin that these are not rumors, but the pure truth. The girl, with tears in her eyes, tells the student that her sister went to the duchy in her place. Benjamin is stunned by the news. Until the last moment, he hoped that these were just stupid rumors. Suddenly, Canna shouts that despite everything, her sister is alive. She just received a letter from her parents. The girl says it's time for her to go and get ready to go home. Benjamin is glad that Astina is okay. But everything happened so suddenly. What is really happening? Meanwhile, the Duchess carefully studies the books, learning very useful information, and gradually begins to understand the basics of training. The girl looks at the wolf, extends her hand to him, and decisively tells him to give him his paw. The beast growls, and then quite noticeably hits Astina on her outstretched palm. The girl realizes that the wolf quite deliberately hit her hand, and wonders whether this can be considered fulfilling an order. The beast rises to its paws and bares its teeth. Astina realizes that he still has a bad attitude towards her. The girl gets up, calmly approaches the wolf, and in a quiet voice orders him to sit. The beast gnaws the bone and does not even look in the direction of the Duchess, completely ignoring her order. Astina thinks that it is not easy for an animal to understand her voice orders without guidance from her hand. The girl puts her hand on the wolf's shoulder and presses lightly, making it clear what exactly she wants from him. After a couple of minutes, the beast sits down. Astina happily praises him for his good work. The Duchess strokes the wolf's head and thinks that by being trained, he will be able to live among people after she leaves this place. The girl looks at the animal, which reminds her very much of Theodora, and decides to temporarily call the wolf Theo. Suddenly, Baron Vernon appears in the garden, who angrily says that although the Duke is now out of his mind, he is nevertheless the girl's husband. Oliver informs the perplexed Duchess that this is Baron Vernon, one of the Duke's vassals. The girl says with a grin that she considered the Baron capable only of intrigue behind his back, but he has finally shown himself. Turning away, Astina says that as expected, the man has no shame. The Baron thinks with amazement that this little trash still dares to be insolent, pretending to be a duchess, although she was simply sold for money. The girl angrily says that the Baron should remember more often who she is, and not act as if he were her overlord. Astina approaches Vernon and says that the Baron is not showing his respect to the Duke with his arrogant rudeness. The girl reaches out her hand and scratches the wolf's chin, which delights the beast. Astina states that until the Duke comes to his senses, she is the head of the family, and the Baron should not forget about this the next time he decides to cross the line. Vernon stubbornly says that her actions are offensive to his lordship, and he, as his vassal, cannot turn a blind eye to this. The Duchess says that it is funny to hear such words from the one who locked the Duke in a cage and gave the order for his reproduction. Oliver watches the young woman with admiration and does not understand where such self-confidence came from in her. Astina pats the Baron on the shoulder and says that if he understands his place, he can go. The Duchess asks the butler what the Baron forgot in the castle, to which Oliver replies that today there is a meeting of vassals. The girl turns sharply and asks why she doesn't know anything about this. Oliver replies that the Duke himself has always attended these meetings, but Astina declares that it is time to change these rules. Leading the wolf by the leash, the Duchess heads towards the castle and remarks that it is time for her to strengthen her authority. The Duchess writes something and tells the butler to give her a stamp, which he uses instead of the Duke's signature. Oliver obediently holds out the seal, wondering with interest what her ladyship is up to. The girl extends her hand to Theo, who is lying on the floor, and orders him to give him his paw. Having placed a seal in the wolf's paw, Astina deftly stamps it on all prepared documents. Oliver leans over to the girl and asks permission to ask what kind of documents these are. The Duchess reads that by this document, Theodore van Atalanta completely trusts his wife for the period of the marriage contract. Theo Astina attaches the sword to his back, rightly deciding that it would definitely not be superfluous in the current state of affairs. Oliver understands that the vassals will not be delighted that the Duchess stole the seal, but he really wants to see what she is up to. After listening to Vernon, one of the vassals declares that her ladyship does not know her place and does not understand how she owes them everything. The Baron angrily reports that he has never been so humiliated before. The men discuss that Reit's family would have been on the verge of death if not for them, but the young lady decided that she now had power. Oliver respectfully opens the door and the Duchess enters the hall, leading Theo next to her. The girl sits down and says that her name is Astina van Atalanta, and she is very glad to see everyone present. Baron Vernon jumps out of his chair and asks what her ladyship is doing at the meeting. Astina asks with a grin if the owner of this house needs a reason to check what belongs to her. The Baron angrily says that the lady cannot be the mistress of this house while his lordship is alive. The Duchess shows everyone the power of attorney and declares that she refuses to accept any objections unless they come from the Duke himself. Astina turns to the wolf and asks if everything suits him. Theo, in response, looks at the girl devotedly. The girl returns to her chambers and reflects that even from one vassal, one could conclude that they are all the same here. The Duchess orders Oliver to bring her all the reports on the state of affairs in the duchy. The butler looks at his mistress with admiration. He has never seen such women, and if Empress Martina were alive, then she would probably be exactly the same. Meanwhile, in the capital, Benjamin tells his father that he plans to take a break from his studies and go to the Duchy of Atalanta. The young man says that Astina got married because of her parents' debts, and if she is doing this under duress, then he must save her. The man wonders if his son has some cunning plan to force the girl to divorce the Duke. The guy says that he needs to apply all his legal knowledge to nullify the marriage, and if this does not help, then he will have only one way out. Benjamin sadly says that Astina is not only a friend to him, and memories of their acquaintance immediately arise in his head. 6 years ago, a student was walking across the square when he suddenly saw a crowd of people and loud screams. Coming closer, the guy learned that some girl was trying to fight with Adolf for her right to use the training ground. Benjamin sees a small young girl and wonders how she had the determination to pick a fight with a local strongman. The girl states that all students at the academy have the privilege of using the training grounds. Adolf looks at the girl with a grin and tells her to get lost while she's still alive. The lady coldly remarks that it is unlikely that someone who judges only by appearance will be able to become a wise knight. Astina advises the guy to change his teacher, since the knightly nobility he learned is so low grade. Benjamin notices that although the girl speaks strangely, she does not yield a single word to her opponent. Adolf invites Astina to show what she can do and chop the logs lying behind him. Suddenly, the lady throws a glove at the guy's face and declares that she, Astina Rite, challenges him to a duel. Adolf raises his sword over his head, hoping that the girl will not be able to withstand his blow with such small hands. Astina easily blocks the attack, leaving the strong man completely bewildered. Suddenly, the guy's sword slips and the girl presses her sword to his throat. After a couple of moments, Astina sheathes her sword and tells Adolf not to appear on the site while she is there. Suddenly, the guy bursts into tears, and the girl embarrassedly thinks that she went a little too far. Surprised, Benjamin approaches Astina, introduces himself, and says that he is glad to meet you. Student says that he saw everything, and the girl's skill amazed him, so he also wants to fight with her. Seeing the lady's confusion, the guy admits that he is counting on her, since there are few people in the academy who are as good with a sword. Astina changes her anger to mercy, shakes hands with Benjamin, and says that she will gladly train with him. A month later, the young people are studying hard, and the guy notices with a grin that after that incident, Adolf is no longer visible. Astina silently chops logs. Benjamin asks in surprise why the girl studies so hard if she is studying at the Faculty of Political Science. The lady calmly replies that she is just strengthening herself because it is too dangerous to be weak. Benjamin reveals that he takes up fencing because he once failed to protect someone who needed it. The girl replies that in this case, the guy needs to become even stronger and offers to raise his sword. The student sheepishly admits that Astina's manner of speaking makes him involuntarily want to bend his knee. The young man looks at the sword made especially for the girl and decisively thinks that no matter what, he will come to her aid. Baron Vernon furiously thinks that if his plan had succeeded, then the next 3 generations could live happily ever after, but the impudent girl ruins all his plans. The Duke's vassals drooled over his enormous fortune and became even bolder when their master turned into a monster. They believed that if they managed to preserve the family, at least formally, then the next 20 years would belong to them. This was the case until the appearance of Astina, who declared that she herself would take care of the Duke. One of the men declares that the Duchess is just a woman, and it will be enough to intimidate her properly. Vernon suggests starting a scandalous rumor that the Duke's wife disappeared in the dead of night. The Baron receives approval from other vassals and says that they need to think about who can kidnap the Duchess. Suddenly, the door to the hall swings open, and a man runs in shouting that they are in big trouble. Ignoring the dissatisfaction of the vassals with such a strange appearance, the man reports that Baronet Ardell has been arrested. An hour earlier, Astilla was sitting in the Duke's office studying papers. From the documents, it is quite clear that things are going very badly on the estate, and most of the money ends up in the pockets of the manager. Oliver reports that if her ladyship wishes to see the manager, then Baronet Ardell is standing at the mansion. The butler says that the man came early in the morning to protest to her ladyship, but he decided not to let him into the mansion. The Duchess notices that all this is very interesting, and calling Theo, offers to go and look at the baronet. The wolf faithfully puts his paw on the girl's hand, and Oliver thinks with amazement that before no one even thought of coming closer to him. When the Duke becomes too much of a pet, the butler experiences mixed feelings, but above all relief. Astina tells Oliver to take the knights as an escort and bring Baronet Ardell to her. Sometime later, the knights bring a man into the office who desperately resists. The man angrily shouts that the Duchess is compromising social norms, and he, as his lordship's vassal, is no longer able to tolerate her dictatorship. Astina coldly says that she did not call the baronet because of the strike he staged in front of the mansion. Suddenly, an account book falls in front of the man, and he, realizing what this threatens, asks in horror what it is. The Duchess menacingly declares that if Ardell is so incompetent, he will lose his title, but if he understood everything, he must be punished. The baronet bows his head and begs for mercy, admits that he could not resist greed. Astina thoughtfully taps her fingers on the table and thinks that small fry are all like that. She hasn't seen anything new. The baronet pleadingly says that for 10 years he has devotedly served the public good. The girl states that someone who has been convicted of misappropriation of funds has no right to talk about loyalty. The baronet tearfully says that he has a wife and children whom he must feed. The Duchess reflects that the crime is not really that serious. Ardell continues that he could not support a family with a baronetcy, which is not even inherited. Suddenly, Theo stands up and, growling menacingly, walks towards the baronet, who begins to shake in horror. Astina looks down at the man and says that she will consider reducing his sentence if he tells her everything he knows. Next to the huge wolf, the Duchess looks completely fragile, the greater the amazement of those around her that she was able to tame the beast. The maids gossip that Astina managed to completely clean up the vassals who were stealing from the master. Thanks to the confessions of Baronet Ardell, all the vassals who plundered the treasury were detained. The leader was the one who had the most influence since the Duke turned into a monster. Oliver guessed that there were embezzlers, but now no one would dare to cross the shrewd Duchess. The maids in the kitchen are discussing that Baron Vernon will now never get out of prison for the rest of his life, and Eliza's situation has become simply ridiculous. One of the girls says with a laugh that that's what she needed. There was no point in counting on anyone standing up for her. The maids say that Eliza is the same maid, but having decided to follow the Baron, she simply sat on their neck. Eliza limps into the kitchen and angrily asks what the girls are talking about. Suddenly, the girl approaches one of the maids and slaps her in the face with all her might. Eliza is shaking with rage, and the girls are screaming that she has completely lost her mind. The girl angrily declares that this will happen to anyone who dares to unceremoniously discuss others. The maid approaches Eliza and shouts that now her antics have come to an end because the Baron has been arrested. Eliza screams in tears to be left alone and runs out of the kitchen. The maids look at each other in confusion. Are the rumors that there was a close relationship between the girl and the Baron true? 4 months ago, despite Eliza's statements that she had a fiancé, the Baron assured that the position of his mistress would bring great benefits to the girl. The man's speeches were skillful. He was very affectionate with the girl, and in the end, she stopped resisting. The fact that she was now desecrated weighed heavily on Eliza, and she wrote to her fiancé about the separation and cut off contact with her parents. The girl became irritable. Even minor things made her angry. And sometime later, Eliza found out that she would soon have a child. One day, Vernon said that the owner's place in the house was empty, and the girl could do him a favor if she got some information. Hearing the refusal, the Baron said that he would leave her, and a lonely girl with a child in her arms would not have a quiet life anywhere. Eliza tried every way she knew to get rid of the child. However, by the will of the Lord, a new life continued to develop in Eliza. The maid began to work much slower and worse, and one day a rag flew into her face. The other maids began to accuse Eliza that because of her slowness, they had much more work to do. The girl attacked aggressively in response to the claims. Rage simply overwhelmed her. Eliza came to Vernon and declared that she would do whatever he asked her to do if the man would protect her. Vernon put his hand on the maid's shoulder and said that he was confident in her choice. From that day on, the Baron took the girl under his protection. She felt the taste of power, and at such moments her sadness receded. The Baron continued to put psychological pressure on Eliza, saying that he loved her, and they had their whole life ahead of them. 4 months later, Astina appeared at the castle, and all the couple's plans collapsed overnight. The beautiful duchess, just like in the old fairy tales, tamed the monster. In an instant, Astina seized power and took control of the estate, and sent all the corrupt vassals to prison. Eliza understands that most likely she and the child will be thrown out of the castle, and if she returns to the village, they will stone her, calling her a whore. Arriving at the dungeon, the girl decides to beg the Baron for at least some money in any way she can. Vernon states that he knew that the girl would come to visit him. The Baron reaches through the bars and tells her to take what he has in his fist. The man unclenches his fist, and Eliza sees a strange glass vial. The Baron says that it is poison. Vernon tells Eliza to add poison to the Duchess's tea. This is the only way so that both he and the girl can survive. The maid resolutely refuses, but the Baron says that if he dies, then she will not have life anyway. Eliza sadly realizes that if she does not follow Vernon's words, she will soon die too. A few days later, Eliza comes into the office with a tray and says that she has prepared tea for her ladyship. The Duchess pauses, pets Theo affectionately, and asks if he would like something to chew. Suddenly, Astina turns to the maid and notices that her belly has grown. Eliza does not have time to say a word, and the Duchess calmly says that it is better for a girl not to get what she has hidden in her sleeve. Astina calmly reports that if Eliza wants to poison her, then the poison should have been poured in advance. The maid falls exhausted to the floor and begs her ladyship to spare her. The Duchess looks at the maid and asks if she really proposes to leave the one who tried to harm on the sly in the mansion. Eliza begins to confess that she is carrying the child of Baron Vernon, who has been arrested. The maid sadly says that the lady should know what happens to a woman who gives birth to a child without a husband. Eliza screams in despair that she was too scared by everything that happened and just wanted to survive. Astina takes the poison from the girl and releases her, saying that she will call her when she is needed. At the tavern, the owner tells Benjamin that he was very lucky to get into the last free room. The The student reflects that the journey to Adelant will take 5 days, even if he rides without rest, so he simply needs to replenish his strength. Suddenly, the young man hears loud female screams asking the men to stop and not do what they shouldn't do. Turning around, Benjamin sees the maid scolding the man for groping her. Hearing the visitor's excuses, the guy thinks that people like him always say the same thing. Benjamin realizes that he cannot leave the woman in trouble and decisively intervenes in the scandal. An absolutely drunk man stands up from behind the counter and staggers, saying that it's not knightly to treat women like that. The men freeze in amazement and try to understand who decided to interfere in their affairs. His Zhang looks at the men with contempt and states that he learned swordsmanship from a famous young lady. The company begins to laugh loudly at the fact that a huge man learned to wield a sword from some girl. Benjamin freezes and listens carefully to the drunkard's words. The student asks if the knight is talking about Astina. Heisen turns around and asks how the guy knows the name of his mistress. Suddenly, the man becomes enraged and attacks the young man, accusing him of being a spy. Astina looms over the kneeling man and asks if he knows why he was brought. Baron Vernon looks up at the girl and says that he does not understand what happened. Noticing Eliza, the Baron angrily thinks that she set him up, tying him hand and foot. The maid confessed to the Duchess everything that she had to endure, how the Baron had dishonored her and then wanted to leave her. Most of the residents of Carabella believed that one should marry the one who took away the virginity. But Vernon not only did not take responsibility for the child, but also used her, forcing her to kill her ladyship. Astina tells the Baron that the real animal was not the owner, but his servant. The man starts shouting that Eliza is lying all the time. She is a slutty girl, and she cheated on a child from no one knows who. Vernon rushes towards the girl and shouts that she has disgraced his honor. Twisted by the knights, the Baron changes tactics and says that no matter what, he sincerely loves Eliza. Astina approaches the man and coldly asks what this information has to do with what he did. The Duchess says that not only is the man accused of extravagance, but he also dared to encroach on her life. Astina states that the child's expenses will be deducted from Baron Vernon's confiscated property. The girl tells Eliza that this will be a lifelong compensation, and she admits the guilt of the owner, who failed to keep track of his maid. Turning to the Baron, her ladyship reports that the death sentence will be carried into effect in 3 days. Elise Astina says that although the girl did everything under pressure, she is not innocent either. The Duchess declares that she cannot leave in the castle the one who tried to harm her mistress and expels her from the duchy. Realizing that she remains alive and with a livelihood, the maid sincerely thanks Astina for believing her words. The girl remembers that at one time she did everything to take revenge and survive. She gritted her teeth and obeyed Waldo's order to spend the night together. But Astina never felt that she had tarnished herself with this, because in the end, she took full revenge on her enemies. Looking at Eliza, the Duchess thinks with regret that not all women are capable of this. Benjamin tells Hsang that he is not a spy. He studies with Miss Astina at the same academy. Suddenly the knight begins to sob loudly and admits that he misses his mistress very much and cannot believe that she got married so early. The men, in bewilderment, say that the knight and the guy picked on them, and now they are making jokes, which means they both need to be taught a lesson. The big man runs up to Heisen, who is sitting on the floor, and raises his leg to strike. A few moments later, the man and the guy stand over their defeated rivals and shake hands as they introduce themselves. The men kneel as Benjamin orders them to apologize to the woman. The maid looks angrily at the guilty ones and asks permission to give them a good whack, too. The student and the knight look at each other in bewilderment, but agree that she has the right to do this. A few minutes later, the men have a new pile of bumps and bruises. The maid cheerfully thanks the men and says that they are real knights and protectors. Benjamin turns to the offenders and says that if they decide to take revenge on the woman, he will return again and will not remain on the sidelines. Heisen pats the guy on the shoulder and offers him a glass of drink, since fate itself brought them together. The knight notes that we still need to wait out the rain, and he has a couple of interesting stories about Miss Astina's younger years. 3 days later, by order of the Duchess, Baron Vernon was executed, and Eliza left the Grand Duke's castle. Many believed that the maid received too lenient a punishment, but Astina took into account the situation of the victim before committing the crime and generously released her. It rains non-stop for 2 days, and the girl and Theo spend all their time in the office. But even indoor games have a limit. The wolf clearly does not have enough walks. Oliver hands the girls papers and says that this is a list of property confiscated from Baron Vernon. The butler reports that his family members have barricaded themselves in the mansion and refuse to leave. The old head of the family rebels, saying that he does not intend to lose everything because of the servant's fraud. Astina sighs tiredly and tells him to tell the old man that he will be thoroughly interrogated about concealing the Baron's other crimes. Oliver shudders at the girl's words that she can at any moment allow him to taste the gift sent to her by the Baron. Astina is one of those people who are confident that everyone should receive what they deserve. The Duchess is strict, but treats her subordinates kindly, but is infinitely merciless towards those who cross her. The stupid vassals did not take into account the peculiarities of her ladyship's character and opposed her, thereby prompting her to act. There's a knock on the door, and the maid reports that the Duchess has guests. Oliver says, puzzled, that there have been no letters announcing the visits. Completely wet, Benjamin and Hyzen happily tell how they accidentally ran into each other in a tavern and decided to visit their mistress together. The girl drinks tea and notices that after such a journey in the pouring rain, the men should immediately wash themselves. Benjamin exclaims that their appearance is completely unimportant, asking her to finally tell what happened to her. Astina calmly reports that she just got married and Benjamin probably already heard about it. The young man notices that the Duchess looks completely adjusted and calm. Sir Hisayang begins to cry again. A surprised Benjamin asks if he is okay. Astina indifferently reports that it is obvious that the knight went into a deep binge, and this state is normal for him. Hisayang says that his heart is breaking because of the young lady's early wedding. In response to the student's remark that the knight missed her, the girl says with a grin that he just likes to drink. Astina recalls that when she took his family heirloom from Sir, he went on a drinking binge out of sadness, and when she returned it, he threw a party to celebrate. When Hyzen was taken away, Benjamin seriously says that he was sure that the girl was forced into the wedding. Astina honestly says that for Kana, this would be coercion, but for her, it is just an acceptable bargaining that would not allow her family to go bankrupt. Suddenly, the girl begins to wonder if everything is okay with Theo. She felt sorry for locking him up, so she decided to just leave him in the office. Astina realizes with surprise that she has become attached to the wolf, and when he falls out of her sight, she begins to worry. The girl treats Theo like an unreasonable child and reflects that loneliness could well be to blame for his past insanity. Benjamin firmly states that if Astina's marriage is against her will, then he will get her out of here. The girl is confused and says that the young man only has the title of baronet, awarded for passing certification, so what forces does he want to help her with? The young man declares that he can do anything if Astina gives her consent to it. The Duchess looks at her fellow student with bewilderment to see if his determination hides feelings for her. Benjamin reports that he knows about the lady's strength, but it is impossible to foresee all circumstances. The guy, in the heat of the moment, asks how he can be sure that the monster won't harm her. So that the young man can be calm about her, Astina decides to show him Theo. The door opens slightly, and Benjamin notices with a shiver the silhouette of the monster duke. The light comes on, and the guy sees how a huge wolf on its hind legs meets its owner and joyfully wags its tail. Clinging to the beast, Astina says that this is Duke Theriot, whom she calls Theo. Benjamin is full of embarrassment. This is clearly not the kind of monster he expected to see. The young man is discouraged, which means Astina really married the beast. The girl invites the young man to take a sabbatical and work for the Atalanta family. Benjamin looks at the girl in confusion. Is this really what his help should be? The Duchess says that during the Duke's absence, the situation in the estate is sad and she needs help. The young man listens with sadness that Astina will be glad to receive such a competent specialist like him. Benjamin came here for completely different purposes, and not to condemn the fate of the estate. The guy looks at the wolf and thinks that he could accept the fact that Astina met a worthy person, but certainly not a beast. The student asks what will happen if he refuses. Instead of answering, the girl gives Theo the command to face. Benjamin jumps up in fright, not believing that his girlfriend is doing this to him. Theo lies calmly at the Duchess's feet and does not react in any way to her strange order. The girl laughingly says that she was joking and did not teach the wolf such commands. The guy is simply discouraged. Astina reports that in exchange for covering her family's debts, she must give birth to an heir, and after that she plans to divorce the Duke. Benjamin jumps up in horror. He never expected to hear this. The young man looks at his girlfriend in despair. He is ready to immediately grab her hand and take her away from here. The student wonders if now is the right time to confess his feelings. The young man tells Astina that he believes her and has always been so, and the girl asks if he will accept her proposal. Benjamin says emphatically that he always wanted to give the girl a little more. The Duchess does not understand why she is looking at Benjamin, and before her eyes is her faithful assistant, right hand, Elito, a reliable and close friend who remained with Martina even on her deathbed. Realizing that the guy will not stay, the girl warmly thanks him for his concern. Benjamin says that he will always wait for Astina, and she can return to him at any time. The Duchess says that leaving like that right away is very reckless, to which the guy laughingly says that she is not the only one to do such things. Astina wishes the young man a good journey and asks him to be careful. Sir Hyson says goodbye to the guy and admits that he was very glad to meet them. Having spurred his horse, Benjamin decides to return not just to the capital, but to go straight to the Emperor. A few days later, Astina and Hyson arrive at Baron Vernon's former mansion to check on the work going on there. The girl tells the knight to stay here and strictly monitor this place. If the man does well, then perhaps they can return to training. Sir Hyson is clearly upset, but the Duchess says with a grin that he will have to put down his sword for a while. Astina confidently says that people need to be used in the right place. The Baron's father bursts into the gate and shouts that this place belonged to the Vernon family and was passed down from generation to generation. The girl orders the knight to bring the old man. No one has the right to interfere with the Duchess's instructions. Vernon continues to scream and tries to open the gate, shaking it violently. Once on the castle grounds, the old man falls on his face and begs her ladyship to listen to him. The man says that his son's crime is huge and he has been punished. But how should the rest of his family feed now? The old man lowers his head even lower and says that his death is not terrible, but there are many small children on it. Astina says that she will not allow her to be taken for a fool. She knows very well where Baron Vernon got the poison from while in prison. The girl reports that suspicious money transfers were received in the name of the Baron's father. 2 days after the arrest, Vernon's wife filed a request to see her husband. The old man looks at the Duchess with fear and tries to convince her that this simply cannot be. Astina contemptuously reports that she left the Baron's family alive, only to watch how they would climb out of the bottom. The Duchess warns that if the old man makes a noise again, she will make sure that he won't even carry his feet. Suddenly, the man jumps up from his knees and shouts that the girl is just shameless trash. Hyson shields the Duchess and orders the old man not to approach her. A distraught Vernon shouts that Astina's only purpose is to bear a man's seed, and her death will be pitiful. The old man shouts that the curse placed on the Duke will also consume the girl's son. Astina immediately thinks that her husband's hereditary disease is too unusual, and the idea of mystical power came to her mind. The Duchess approaches Vernon and asks what he knows about the curse. Instead of answering, the old man hatefully spits in the girl's face. The man laughs and only says that the girl's husband will never be saved. The knight gives the girl a handkerchief, and she, looking at Vernon, coldly remarks that he underestimates her. The Duchess says that infidelity is a facet that cannot be left unnoticed, and orders the old man to be thrown into prison. Hyson notices with amazement that his mistress took the insult inflicted on her too easily. Astina's past life was too difficult for her to remain susceptible to such things. Lying in bed, the Duchess thinks that if the Duke has been cursed, there must be a way to lift it. Noticing that his owner is upset, Theo begins to lick her face. The girl gently strokes the wolf, notes that he has become quite obedient, then tenderly kisses him on the forehead. At night, Astina suddenly opens her eyes and feels the presence of a person nearby. Turning around sharply, the girl sees that an unfamiliar man is sleeping on the bed next to her. The Duchess looks at the young man in bewilderment and notices a collar around his neck, but Theo is nowhere to be found. Astina does not understand what is happening. There are no signs of a break-in, and judging by the collar, the Duke himself is clearly in front of her. The girl carefully turns the man onto his back, and is amazed to see that he bears a striking resemblance to Theodore. On the day of the coronation, Theodore tells Martina, who appeared, that he was sure that she had disappeared from the palace. The girl indifferently says that she has fulfilled her lifelong desire, so there is no point in running away. The man admits that he locked the doors of the hall with the thought of getting rid of the witch, and she should understand this. Martina sadly says that she did not expect anything good from a person from the Blanche family. The king wonders what will happen if he orders the death of a girl who has become useless to him. Martina indifferently says that in this situation, there will be one more royal heads that she will cut down. Theodore notes that there is nothing that the girl cannot do, but that is not what he wants. Martina hears that. Appreciating her merits, the king grants her the title of Marquise and a new surname. The girl admits that she helped the king for a personal reason, and there is nothing more that she wants to receive. Theodore says that Martina can ask him for anything her heart desires. The girl sadly understands that even after destroying the monster, the dead cannot be brought back, and says that she has no reason to live. The king looks at the girl softly and says that he is naming her with the name of the clan. From now on, Martina Owen de Letha must live for the sake of her king. Astina looks at the man and thinks that he is incredibly similar to the king. Could it be that Theodore was also reborn? The young man begins to moan and, gradually coming to his senses, opens his eyes. Suddenly, the girl pulls the leash with all her might, which instantly brings the Duke to his senses. Astina squeezes the collar with force and, in a rage, asks the young man who he is. Distraught, Astina whispers, turning to Theodore, that after his departure she lived every day as if in hell. The girl admits that not an hour passed when she was not angry with the king and did not forget him for a single moment. Astina, in tears, says that Theodore forced her to cut his throat, and now he has the nerve to return to her. The girl screams, pressing herself to the boy's face, that Theodore is a terrible and cruel person, and she curses him. Astina then whispers that she still loves her king and kisses him passionately on the lips. A hereditary disease in the Adelant family manifested itself before the age of 20, and the heir received recognition only after reaching adulthood. The Duke's parents have already lost 2 children from a terrible hereditary disease. That is why mother and father did not show feelings of affection for Theodore, who was born the youngest. Thinking that the disease would suddenly manifest itself, the boy was never allowed out of the mansion. To all the child's requests to go outside the castle, the father replied that there was enough everything in his room. The boy did not understand why this was happening, because he so dreamed of looking at the sea. But the Duke remained adamant and simply left the room, not wanting to see his son suffer. Theodore studied all kinds of sciences and even fencing without leaving home. By the time he came of age, the young man had grown into a duke, as if he had stepped out of a painting. Only after 20 years did the father and mother open their arms for their son. The young man cried, saying that now he could not be afraid to wonder if he would go crazy. Theodore learned to manage the family's affairs, because it was his duty to inherit the family name and continue the family line as quickly as possible. After a while, the young duke completed his studies and was already accustomed to the work he performed in place of his father. But one day, terrible news came. The Duke and Duchess's carriage fell into the abyss. At his parents' funeral, Theodore thought with despair that he didn't know how to grieve. The young man often wondered whether he could live the life of an ordinary person. He said that he could not even imagine himself with a child in his arms. Oliver often invited Theodore to look at portraits of girls, but the young man did not want to see them. Eventually, he began to show symptoms of the disease that nearly wiped out the Adelant family. The disease made the gentle Duke cruel, increasing the time he lost his sanity. The Vassals wanted to find a girl and marry the Duke before the opportunity to continue the family line was lost. Upon learning of this, Theodore shouted in rage that they were turning him into livestock. The young man, in a fit of anger, yelled that for them he was not a man, but a thoroughbred stallion. One night, the Duke gave Oliver his last order so that he could not harm anyone. Theodore asks to lock him up. Having come to his senses, the Duke was amazed to find a girl right in front of him, crying and whispering that she still loved him. When the stranger kissed Theodore, he could not understand whether he was sleeping or had already died. The Duke sits up in bed and asks which man the girl keeps talking about and who she is. Astina freezes for a moment and suddenly realizes that it is not Theodore in front of her. The Duke angrily says that if a girl values her life, then she should identify herself and explain what she is doing with him in the same room. The girl abruptly jumps off the bed and quickly runs out of the room in tears. The young man discovers that he was lying completely naked and, throwing a blanket over his shoulders, looked at the room in surprise. Suddenly, Oliver runs into the chambers, feels the master, and thanks God for returning him to his former appearance. Theodore admits that he doesn't understand a damn thing about what's going on here and asks who the girl who was with him in the chambers is. The butler is silent for a while and then says that it was Her Grace, the Duchess. The young man looks at Oliver in amazement. Was that girl really his wife? After the butler says that everything was done for the sake of the heir, the Duke realizes that nothing has changed. Theodore asks in surprise how that girl managed to survive, to which Oliver declares that she is very special. The Duke orders that clothes be brought to him and then go to the office to look at current affairs. According to the butler, it turned out that the Duke had been absent for a little less than a year. The young man quickly goes to the office, sadly noting that most likely things on the estate have fallen into complete disrepair, and asks where Baronet Ardell is. Noticing that Oliver is embarrassedly silent and ignoring his question, the Duke turns around in surprise. The butler says that the baronet was suspected of embezzlement, removed from his post, and is now under arrest in his home. Theodore tries to digest the information received and says that in this case, the matter should be entrusted to Baron Vernon. Oliver reports that the Baron was executed on charges of attempting to kill the Duchess. The Duke orders the butler to bring him a documentary list to his office in order to understand what is happening here. Entering the office, Theodore sees significant changes and asks in bewilderment why it smells so much like dog. Oliver wipes the sweat from his forehead and decides to say that it was not the dog who lived here, but the Duke himself. The young man sighs tiredly and does not understand what to do with everything that happened in his absence. Meanwhile, Astina runs out into the garden and begins to scream loudly in complete despair. The girl wonders in horror why the one with whom she is married is like two peas in a pod like Theodore.